Welcome to the weekly offload. Today we have with us Broderick Wright in the studio. Welcome, Broderick.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming, mate. So we are going to run through a six again with Broderick. So Broderick actually played for the Cronulla Sharks and the Parramatta Eels. So tell us about your career, mate.
Going back a bit now, I debuted in 2008 with the Eels. I'm a Parramatta junior.
Yeah.
So I played on my junior footy there and went through the grades and debuted in 08. I played there first grade 08 and 09. 09 obviously was a big season for me. We made the grand final that year. I played a bit of first grade. And then went across to the Sharks for a couple of years. Had some good times there as well. And then went overseas and, sort of finished my career in sort of my mid-20s.
So Achilles, who's on later in the show, myself, a massive Eels fan. So we have to ask you this question.
Of course.
Why do you think the Eels didn't win? I feel like it's a main topic on this podcast about 2001 and 2009. Obviously, we can't blame you for 2001, mate. But why do you think the Eels didn't win in 2009? Could you pinpoint it to anything?
Oh, look, I think 09 was a fairy tale run to start with, really. Don't think anyone really thought we're going to get that far through the season. If you sort of ask most fans midway through, they were sort of looking at the next season already, and then we strung a few games together, and then obviously had a really good back end of the season. We won, I think, 8 straight coming into the finals, and then sort of surprised some people through those finals games. And then, look, there's a bit of controversy about what happened in the grand final, and that was sort of came to pass a couple of years later with the salary cap scandals. But look, they were just too good on the day, and we gave them too much of a lead. We came back with a bit of a wet sail in the second half, but it was just too little, too late. And seems to be the story of Parramatta at the moment. We give away too big a lead in the first half of grand finals. Last year was no exception. I should say. But look, as I said, I was born in 1987, so I've never seen them win one.
Yeah, that you're even
very long,
mate. You're closer than me. I was 1989, so you smelt it. You're so close to it. I actually heard a story from the grand final in 09. I believe it was Craig Bellamy just talking about his Storm plays, and he actually said when the Eels started coming back, he said it was like a wave. He goes, all the players said, I've never experienced anything from the crowd. So for yourself, I know you were 18th man in that game, but that year, did you feel the team support? Like, did you guys feel it around the area?
Definitely. Look, I think if anything, Parramatta as a fan base, it's always surprised me how broad and deep it goes, all around, even around the country. It seems that Parramatta, particularly because of the 80s, I think, and the success during that period, they sort of became everyone's second team. And then Parramatta as a suburb and as a city now, it's just a real part of us. And I think that, when you have success like that, people sort of latch on. And I think that success and the excitement, I think around the way in which we sort of got there from what was probably a bit of a fairy tale sort of scenario, people sort of jumped on board and we really felt that every game we won, it's sort of like for that belief sort of became stronger and stronger, and definitely you could feel it as you walked through the town. That's the last couple of weeks, how much people were jumping on.
And mate, we'll be Achilles and I will be devastated, but we've done our research. So is this correct? You debuted in 2008 against the Cowboys.
Yes.
And then the next year in 2009, you played 12 first grade games. Is that correct?
I think I played 14 in total.
Oh, okay.
So I think it was 13 in 09.
Okay.
So I played 26 for the Sharks and 14 for the Eels. So
okay.
In total.
And when you were... how is your feeling on grand final day as an 18th man? To be honest, I've always wanted to ask someone that. How did you feel?
It was a really surreal week because I don't know if you remember, but sort of the Friday night game when we beat the Dogs in the semi-final, Nathan Kalis, who was obviously our captain at the time, he did his hamstring in really early on in the game. And he came off, and I remember I was in the crowd, I was 18th man for that game as well. And I remember the physio looking at me and just sort of giving me a look as in like, get ready.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And then the whole week I was playing the whole week. It was sort of like,
oh, really?
they were going to give Nathan to the last possible moment to sort of prove his fitness, which is more than fair enough. He was our captain, he was our leader and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And so right up on, so even like to the point where the night before the game, we stayed in a hotel, even though it was a local game, we all stayed together in a hotel. And even up to that point, I trained as if I was playing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it was surreal and nerve-wracking at the same time. And it was actually, it was planned that, so the rotation we had going throughout the season was Nathan Fui would start, and then Timmy and myself would come off the bench. And then when I got injured, I actually did my knee, I think in round 16 or 17 against the Warriors. I had 2-3 weeks off, I had to clean out. And then I sort of, Feletti came into the team and started playing fantastic, and obviously he sort of held that spot throughout the finals. But then when we had the final week, it was sort of set in stone that I would start for Nathan. So I'd gone from being sort of 18th man and playing maybe a handful of first grade games. And the whole final week I was sort of preparing to start in the grand final, which was quite nerve-wracking. And it got to a point where, you sort of don't know what's going to happen. And then I was obviously a little bit disappointed that I didn't get the chance to play, but in the same breath, the buzz and the excitement of it is something I'll never forget for sure.
Yeah, and if you ask my mum, she would say that the Eels are the rightful premiers. But as a fan, I agree. But she'd love their title to be awarded. But I think they needed to get found out. Sort of, do you remember the next year they got found out before the final series? Yeah. I always wish that.
Year before that.
I wish that happened a year before, because I honestly, I'm completely biased, but I don't see anyone's would have stopped us apart from Melbourne, because they had that experience in grand finals.
It's actually funny because if you would have asked us who we would have preferred to play, because I remember we beat the Storm at home during the year, and we beat them quite convincingly from memory. And they obviously, you look back at their team, that star-studded team. But I think the Dogs were probably the biggest threat that year. And when we sort of beat them in the semi-final, I don't think we were really disappointed to play the Storm, to be frank with you. But in the same breath, just clinical. And I think we made some early mistakes from memory, and they just put us to the sword. Cooper Cronk in particular had a really good game. Billy Slade had a great game. But look, that's life. And I think you look back at it at the end of the day, it's we can't chalk it up as a premiership. And I think that's just the main thing we've got to push on now and focus on hopefully getting one before my lifetime's over.
Before all of our lifetimes are over. I'm glad you actually mentioned that game, mate, the previous one, the Dogs game. I've said previously on this podcast that is the greatest game I'd say sporting event I've been to in Australia, because obviously living in the UK, you get a bit spoiled with the atmosphere over there. So, but that 2009, just the way that the Eels fans were split and then the Doggies fans were on the other side, it was just amazing.
I think the build-up too, I think from memory, we played the Titans the second week. So we got beaten by the Dragons the first week. And they were actually the red-hot favourites that year, if I remember. To go through. And we beat them in the first semi, 1 versus 8, and there was a massive upset. And then we had the Titans on a Friday night, and we beat them quite convincingly on a Friday night. And then sort of we had a real build-up to the following Friday. And I remember, I think by Monday, it was sold out. And so the whole week leading into that Friday game was pretty intense. And look, obviously it was a massive crowd, and to experience the buzz of that stadium, and of course once again we won quite well in the end. It was pretty cool.
Yes, I remember. So we spoke about on this podcast. I remember the Eels run very well. So actually, to a whole nother story. This is about you, Broderick, but I had $5,000 on the Eels to make the 8 that year.
Oh, wow.
And that started, which was a very big gambling story. I got a, big prize. And then it's a whole nother story for another podcast. But that Yeah, I remember those games so well because I remember going to Shark Park as well with my mate.
Sunday.
Yeah.
I already signed with the Sharks by that stage.
Okay.
So I remember that game really well because I sort of felt like I was on show for the previous year. It was a really cool, like, core group of players. And I remember because I was quite young. I was 20, 21, maybe just turned 22 at that stage. We had some real good older heads who I'm still mates with now. Eric Groth, Nathan Kalis, Nathan Hindmarsh, Luke Burt. A really core group of older blokes. And I remember it was the first time, because I was sort of new to the first grade world as well, and I wasn't a particular, a prodigy, so to speak, growing up. I sort of, got into the first grade squad maybe 18 months earlier, and I remember training and trialling, and then we played reserve grade, and we won the reserve grade grand final in 08. And I remember that off season being my first proper off season, and so by the end of the year, I played probably 12, 13 games by then. I finally started feeling part of the team. And that Shark Park game was a prime example. We ended up going for a few beers afterwards at Northies, and I remember feeling like a real adult though. I was 22. I remember feeling like, I'm out with adults because the guys that I was hanging out with were 26, 27, 28, as opposed to hanging out with the flag boys. They're sort of 19, 20. I finally felt like an adult. It was really, really strange feeling. But really good times. Really good.
No footy players have ever gotten in trouble there.
It was before the days of mobile phones. And I look at that. I'm married with a couple of kids now, and whenever the stories come on, my wife always says tongue in cheek, idiot footballers, blah blah blah. I think to myself, mobile phones are just getting people in trouble now, especially with social media and some of the stuff they post. Just like, oh my god.
Yeah.
Back then we had Nokia 3310s, I think. So,
and even would you say? I know it's not like you played 20 years ago, but would you say even there was a better relationship even with journalists? That's what I've heard with players as well. Now apparently it's like a massive divide, but back then apparently you could have a bit of banter, have a drink, or would you say you were already seeing that happen? Divide?
Look, I think if anything, what I've noticed a lot of is the media cycle has changed in terms of where people get their news in particular. And so, the 24-hour news cycle as well, people always want a story. The online, internet, Facebook, Instagram, there's so many places people can get, TikTok, can get their stories from. So, and there's also new media, like, you got podcasts, and you got some podcasts now would have more of a following than news channels. So I feel that, and I find that now with the podcast, the barrier of entry for journalism has changed. So you're getting a different style of interview where, people are probably using their influence. Like you look at, say, bloke in a bar, and how it's a different kind of access point where they're seeing them, like it's more like a, you're sort of getting led into the world, the inner sanctum, because they know that those people won't do them wrong. Whereas like some of the old school journalists, particularly certain mastheads now, they're quite a bit older, and particularly when those people have, and this is all due respect to those journalists, don't have maybe the career to back it up. When those kind of journalists are sort of having a crack at footballers, it sort of comes from a really weird place where it's just like, well, you're just trying to dig up stuff because you want to sell newspapers. Yeah. And it becomes so obvious in the football world that, that's their only goal. Like, they're not your friends, and they might act like they're your friends, but all they're trying to do is get an angle so they can sell more newspapers. That's the reality of it. And let's be frank, good news doesn't sell newspapers. Going to the children's hospital and spending 5 hours with a kid doesn't sell a newspaper. It's going to a nightclub and doing something stupid whilst under the influence. That's what sells newspapers. And I remember, like, back then, this is once again before and this is in all due respect, before footballers would dob themselves in, because now it feels like they just dob themselves in because they got Instagram and just throwing things out there, and it's just rife for trouble. But I remember back in the day, you have a Mad Monday and you'd have journalists like camped outside of your venue, just waiting to see someone do something wrong, like it just because they're just looking for and I always say, if you put 500 blokes in a pub, you're going to get all different kinds of people, different personalities, different IQs, different backgrounds, different opinions as to what's right and wrong. And then you turn the dial up again and you have testosterone-filled young kids, really, who have been told they're the best thing since sliced bread for quite some time. And then you wonder as to why they get in trouble. It just... And what I suppose has become a real difference as well is that the welfare and the clubs have become a lot more involved because they've had to. And I remember Parramatta was really quite good at that. And I think we were ahead of our time in terms of the older guys. When we wanted to have a drink or we wanted to have, some downtime, we were quite well looked after by the club, whether they put on an event somewhere private or they sort of, not locked us down, but effectively kept us out of trouble. We had minders out with us to make sure that we wouldn't get in trouble. And then also we had a no dickhead policy. Back then the older guys, I think, whereas that they probably came from a different era. Like the guys that I played with, who were sort of coming to the peak of their powers, the Heinies and the Kalises, they were a good, 10 years older than me. So it was another generation again, where they didn't know mobile phones, whereas I went through the age of mobile phones becoming a thing, and then I remember getting absolutely blasted at the Sharks because I'd been to Thailand and I was 22, 23. I'd been to Thailand the week before. The year, like the off season before, and I had photos, and this is when Facebook just came out. This is 2011, 2012, and you're posting everything on Facebook. It was cool, and I remember posting. It was like a picture of me like drinking beer directly out of a tap, with my Bintang singlet. I just looked like an absolute idiot.
Typical Aussie.
I remember. I never forget it. We had a fake account approached me and approached everyone on the team without us knowing, and it was dressed up to be a young, person. And you think nothing of it. So, no worries, they can be my friend, because you won't have heaps of friends back then, you know what I mean? And I remember they got marched in, and it was actually like a fake account set up by this company that was trying to teach us about internet behaviour. And I remember they pulled up my online photos of me, and then they then superimpose that photo in a fake newspaper. So that's what it could look like if you don't put your head in. And I remember getting absolutely blasted by the management staff, and I was like, I don't know, like, geez, how we're 22-year-old kids, So it's and now I just don't. You go to the next level now where people have access to players that they've never had before as well. They can see them in a club or see them in a pub and take a selfie with them or take a photo of them and share that without the player's permission. And that goes to another level where, it just, once again, it sells newspapers and it sells advertising space. And, and because they can now chase down those avenues to find content, because that's the world we live in now, is content. If you haven't got content, you die. And I just find now that the traditional media channels, the good journalists who have been around for a long time must have some sort of nous because they've been around long enough. They've got the contacts and they've got the stories and they can write a good, they can write good articles. But I just think the media landscape's changed dramatically.
Yeah, I think it's a great point on this podcast. I think. Joe Rogan, obviously everyone knows Joe Rogan. It's a funny, it's an interesting thing a topic you bring up, because he said something along the lines of like, oh, no mainstream media would say this, but I'm saying this. And then he got a lot of comments also saying, you are the mainstream media now. True, yeah. So it's like, as you said, it's flipped to what you think is the mainstream media even nowadays, isn't it?
Because even small things, like we're getting quite delving quite deep into this world now, but those mainstream media channels have stakeholders. And those stakeholders would have a certain way in which they want the news presented, either the chief editor or shareholders or whatever. Whereas you with the ability of this new mainstream media, which is podcasting or similar sort of scenarios where they can get their information out and their content out with very little barrier, they can say what they want to say. And it becomes more interesting because the end user feels more engaged and involved. And I listen to podcasts all the time when I go for a walk or go to the gym or whatever. And the good ones make you feel like you're sitting in a pub with them just having a chat. And you're in on the conversation. You can't talk back, but you're in on the conversation. And you actually have and it's actually making, because you've got these people who have really good opinions who would never have had the ability to voice their opinions in mainstream media because the barrier was so high to get in. Whereas now those guys have a platform and the people hear their platform, but this guy actually knows what he's talking about. So it sort of broadens the avenues for people to listen in.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you're saying you can say whatever you like, Achilles was actually bagging you before the podcast, mate. He was just saying, he goes, do you remember that Broderick Wright? He goes, Costa. No, I'm just joking, mate. But it's great. I think great points, mate, you bring up. As you said, we've sort of gone down, but that's what a podcast is too. Like you said, just sort of discussing different topics as well that maybe some people wouldn't hear on your normal television stations exactly right.
as well. And you can. What I like about it is you can sort of plug in and plug out as you wish to, and if there's a topic that you see value in, you can hone in on that topic, and if there's one that you don't really see as much value in, you can just pass through it. So, whereas I think that when you're working with a mainstream media, you've got 200 words, and they've got to make the most of those words. They've got to appeal to a greater mass. And the reality is that the greater mass likes controversy, they like problems, they like a villain, and they like to pin it on someone. And that's what I've always seen is it's a double-edged sword. The best of the best attract the most attention, and by attracting the most attention, they can easily be shown as a villain. And then you look at, say, what happened today with Latrell Mitchell and Jack White, and then the cops come out and said that he was wrong, and he effectively lied under oath, and yet that story won't last 5 minutes, whereas the original story would have lasted for days, because once again, it's Latrell Mitchell's the pin-up boy, not some cop that got it wrong. It's the world, unfortunately. It's what comes with the territory and why they earn the big bucks, and that's why I've never been. I've always, been a believer that the big players earn their keep because they don't have a life. They play football, and then outside of football, they're for a period of 10 years they belong to the society. They don't no downtime at all. So.
Yeah. Should we bring up another important issue, mate? So you played in the forwards. Did you have any concerns about CTE or just after you finished your career or even during? Was that a big conversation back then, would you say? Or do you think it's...
It wasn't a big conversation at all back then. It didn't exist, really. Like it was, it wasn't talked about. It was certainly not... was that movie that came out with Will Smith in it, Concussion? That was a big... That was like, 2014, 2015, maybe even later than that. But look, it's certainly something that you think about from time to time. And it's funny, like small things, like if I forget my keys or if I forget where I put something or I forget somebody's name. And I work in real estate, so... I'll shake someone's hand at an open home and then they'll walk around the corner and I'll just forget their name. And I think to myself, oh, geez, is that CT or or do I just have 1,000 things going through my mind? So my wife and we have a running joke. I've got really good memory when it comes to useless facts. My trivia skills are through the roof. So I always say to her, the moment that I stop remembering those kind of useless information, there's a problem. But look, even like I know my uncle through marriage, so my wife's uncle, he played first grade. He was a very good footballer for the Bulldogs back in the 60s. A guy called Les Johns, very famous footballer. He's donating his brain when he passes to science to sort of look at the effect. Because he was quite a small guy. He was like a jockey playing fullback. And so he got knocked out quite a bit. I was relatively lucky, I think. I think I got knocked out once really badly where I had to miss a game. And I remember thinking back to it now. There was moments where like I'd sort of been dazed and got up and sort of had those sort of stars, but I kept playing. But look, I try not to think about it too much. There's nothing much I can do about it now. I think I was lucky that I got out when I did. I got out quite young and I did sort of play into my sort of early to mid-30s. I sort of got out sort of 5 or 6 years before that, so that may have helped. But, look, as I said, it's something we can't really control now. And, you know, I'm glad there's protocols in place now for the guys going forward. Look, it's a contact sport, I guess. And my son plays football and, you know, it's certainly something that you think about, but what do you do?
That's what I was going to ask you, mate. So your son does play rugby league. Mm-hmm. Was that a hard decision for you? Was that a discussion with yourself and your wife, or was it pretty easy? Was your son was interested and you thought, well, he's interested, he'll play, or was it a tougher decision than you thought?
I think he sort of guided us, to be fair. He's only 5 years old. He's playing up a year. He's playing under sixes. He just turned 5 this year. So they still play league tag anyway, so he's not having any contact. But he loves it. Like him and I wrestle in the house and he just loves it. And we got a footy post at the back that kicks the footy around, and people always say, oh, do you want him to play footy? Do you want him to play footy? Mate, if you want to be a dancer, I wouldn't care.
Yeah.
You know, he's my son. If he wants to, you know, be a doctor and not play sport anymore, it's up to him. But I think that I know he really enjoys it. And he sleeps in a Parramatta Eels bed with footy next to him and his medals lined up. Like he loves it. He loves it. And you know, I think
you'd almost be taking something away from him, do you think? And
I think I'm looking at respect. At that age, you know, until they sort of get to sort of 13, 14, 15, you know, there's not much damage you can really do, in my opinion. Like they're not clotheslining each other at 6 years old, you know, and they're certainly not big enough, because I genuinely feel that a lot of the impact injuries that come with sport happen with pure physics. When you get bigger, you get faster, and the pure physics of football change. That's when the real damage can effectively happen. But at that kind of age, mate, no, just let them go, I reckon, in all respect. And like even small things, I'm actually, this whole new sort of world they live in where they play league tag, and I think there's a problem there too, because you're not teaching kids how to tackle, and you're not teaching kids about, it's a contact sport. At some stage, they're going to have to come to terms with that. And I know there's a whole argument as to why they do it, but I think that, you know, you need to teach them at a younger age to tackle properly. And I think the best way to learn is through repetition. And I think that if you take contact out, particularly up until sort of 10 or 11, as they wanted to at one stage, it's sort of just setting them up for disaster when they turn 12 or 13. If anything, I'd probably look down the path of, you know, age and weight maybe at 14, 15, 16. But I remember being that age and you play against, you know, some of the Polynesian boys and they were much bigger than you at that age, but if you tackle around the legs, mate, they still tackle the same way and fall the same way. And I think if you start looking at weight for age, there's a problem there, because, you know, I think up here mentally has a lot to do with it too. And if you've got a 16-year-old kid playing a 12-year-old kid, doesn't matter if they're the same weight, one's going to be stronger than the other one. So I don't think there's an exact science to it. I think rugby league has been quite adamant as to what they are. We're a tackle sport, you know, we're a contact sport. And, you know, I think they put the right metrics in place. And I know the game's so much different to what I played as well. Like the speed of the game now and the fatigue factor and how fast it is. And that actually that is a real eye opener. I don't know how some of the stats that some of these players are putting up now. I remember when I was playing, if you ran 100 meters plus in a game, that was considered a good game. And these guys are peeling 200 meters a game, like just regularly. And then it's like, wow. And then they do it for 80 minutes. And some of the body types too, like Junior Paulo playing 80 minutes, like, it blows my mind. It's amazing. It's and I suppose a lot of that has to do with, the way in which they're training now and the level at which they're training and for how long that is. But still, it's amazing. It's amazing what the human body can do.
Yeah, we've been a big, on this podcast, big advocate of Payne Haas. And I think, like I've just said, the quality of his minutes, like for such a big guy to play at that level, it's pretty amazing because you used to have, as you said, probably when you played as well, you'd probably come on if you came off the bench and think, he fatigues usually around this minute mark. But with Payne Haas, you think, when does he fatigue? It's not fair for the smaller boys, is it?
It's just relentless.
Yeah.
Because I remember, when we used to have a rotation, it was like, particularly in the front row, you usually carry 2 front rowers on the bench, and the starting front row would play maybe 20, 25 minutes, and then the reserve would come on for, say, 10, 15, and then half-time, and then maybe 10 to 15 after, and then they come back on for the second half. So you mean your sort of your best prop was probably playing 50, maybe 60 minutes at most, and now they're peeling off like 80-minute games like regularly. It just, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah, 100%, mate. So you played for 2 clubs, mate. So where would you rather be? Would you rather be in Parramatta on Eat Street, or would you rather be on Cronulla Beach? This actually, when I was coming up with the spreadsheet, Polly thought this was a great question to ask because
It's a good question because I'll tell you a story. So when I signed with the Sharks, it was a big deal for me. It was my first big contract, and I think there was a big thing about me moving away from home. I was living with my parents at the time. I was 21, 22. And then going down to live by the beach, which, for a guy that grew up in Parramatta was like, wow, I'm going to be at the beach. And I'd met my girlfriend, who's now my wife, 6 months previously, and we started getting semi-serious at that stage. And I remember getting a rental right near the beach, one bedroom. And I think I picked the furthest part of Cronulla away from my house in Parramatta. So I didn't go to Carringbar or Miranda. I went to South Cronulla, which is like it's the absolute end of the earth. And a beautiful place. During the off season, it was great. You train during the morning and go for swim in the afternoon. But I remember Friday afternoons, if we had the weekend off, I was the only idiot driving away from Cronulla on a Friday.
Yeah.
Down Woodville Road, down King George's Road, away from the beach to spend the weekend with my friends and my wife or my girlfriend. And I suppose it's just what you know. And I've always been a Parramatta boy, born and raised. I live there now with my family. My business is in Parramatta. So, look, I definitely think I'm a Parramatta boy. But I did have a great time living in Cronulla for the time.
a few trips to Northies. Yeah. Should we lead into that, mate? You just mentioned post-career. So our last guest we had on was Justin Ashley. So he's CEO of this gym where we are at the moment. So basically, just a short story of his career. He played in the NSL, the soccer league. Sort of didn't work out, or he made the decision to change over to fitness, and then has had a very successful career. How did that come about for you? And was that a tough decision? Was it an easy decision? And you're killing it at the moment. Are you happy where you are now?
I think I'm a lot more self-assured. That's probably the advice I wish I gave myself if I could go back and give myself as a younger man. I remember I wasn't a superstar footballer when I was young, and I think it had a lot to do with how I approached football. So I didn't make my first representative team until I think under 16s, and then I didn't get a contract until I was about 18. I think I trained and trial to get into the SG ball side. And I remember a good friend of mine and one of my first coaches, Joey Grimer, who still was at the Eels now, he told me that I was the last last squad member picked, and it was between me and somebody else, and that was as an 18-year-old. And then from there, I had a really good year 12. I made CHS and got re-signed, and then that sort of got me into the system, so to speak. But I think I mean this respectfully to myself. I think I probably got a lot further than my natural ability sort of dictated. I think I pushed the envelope as to what my natural ability really was. I trained my backside off, and I think that I'm very proud of my career because of that. But in the same breath, I remember I sort of had an average second year at Cronulla, and Shane Flanagan had come on as the coach. Ricky Stewart was my original coach, and that was the reason why I went down there. And Flanagan was a lovely guy, but he pulled me into his office sort of halfway through the season and said, look, if you want to stay here, there's a spot for you, but it's going to be on a very reduced wicket, and you have to sort of, train and trial again. And we'd love to have you here, but not on the kind of money you're on now. And I remember being sort of 1 foot at the door at that point, going, well, you know what, maybe this is just not meant to be. And I think because, not that I didn't love football, I went overseas and I had a great time playing overseas, and then I came back and played sort of reserve grade here for a couple of years.
Because did you play in France? Is that right as well? Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, a couple of years. Yeah, how was that?
It was great. Yeah. I travelled the world, met great people. And football's, I've still, some of my best friends are my footy mates. And so I owe football a lot because of that. But to answer your question, I'm a much better real estate agent than I was a footballer, I suppose is the way I would put it. And because of that,
Your boss would be happy to hear that, mate.
I am the boss. So.
Oh, there you go. Well, there you go.
I suppose I'll tell him
give yourself a pat on the back, mate.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah,
but I think I've gotten a lot out of that over the last 3-4 years, because some of my mates who were exceptionally good footballers, who played State of Origin and played for Australia and had very successful, glittering careers, they've sort of come to me for advice about the transition afterwards, because whether you're the best thing since sliced bread or an average first grader, it stops. There's an end date. And, not everyone can be a coach, and not everyone can be on Channel 9. So there is a whole world and a whole life to have. Look, I'm 36 years old now. I'm nowhere near the peak of my powers. I'm still got at least 30 years left in me in terms of working. So I see football as a really interesting chapter in my life, and I definitely taught me a lot that I've taken into the real world, so to speak. But I also am pretty content where I'm at.
Yeah, it's actually so good that obviously we've chatted about this, because Justin said there's nothing more common than a talented failure, and what you were saying right now is sort of the same thing. And as you're saying, some of your, I guess, peers had a successful footy career, but yeah, it comes to an end, doesn't it, in the end?
Yeah, and I suppose maybe the difference now is that the revenue and the level of pay the footy players get now is that much higher, particularly at the lower end of the spectrum. Like, I remember when I first started, minimum wage was 50K. I think it's 3 times that now. And it's all in line with, inflation and all that sort of stuff. But, if you're earning, 1 million, $1.2 million a year for 5, 6, 7 years, you can set yourself up pretty well. And then if you're, and that's probably something that I still get now, which surprises me, is people will remember me from football when I'm selling a house or when they see me or whatever. And that mind boggles me, because I don't think I had a glittering career that someone would remember. So I think that, I think you've always got to have something in your back pocket. And I know when I was lucky, not lucky, but I think because football wasn't always my first choice, I'd sort of made my mind up through high school that I wanted to go to university. And so I went to a decent school and I got a good mark in my HSC, and because I didn't think football would work out. I just kept trying because I wanted it to, but I think I was mature enough to sort of have a backup plan.
Yeah, I think, as I said, Justin was saying exactly the same thing as you. I think you've done well, mate. It's been a fantastic 6 again with yourself, mate. So should we move on
course.
to the international games?
Mm-hmm.